Woo! Baby, we're here for another, yes, I am going to do another top 8. And because this one's by request. So, and I appreciate that. I'm very open to any requests for any type of show, anything you want to hear about. I'm totally on board with doing. Because I want you to get value out of the value that you bring to me by being a Sovryn Tech patron on Patreon. So for all the Sovryn Tech sweaties out there, we're going to get into a top 8. Now, admittedly, this top 8, this is kind of tough. And I'm going to be breaking this one up into multiple parts. I'm not sure when exactly I'll release the second or maybe even third part, or maybe even more than that, because this is just a massive fucking subject. Just huge. And the subject is comic books. The reason I say that this is so huge is because there are so many different comic book companies. So many of these companies bring something a little bit different to the table with who they are. And just history in general, well, it brings up all kinds of things. Anyway, I guess that's the bottom line, is that you can't really... So I do top 8s where I just picked an arbitrary number, that being 8, and because I like base 12 math, I picked, instead of 5 or 10, right? I picked 8, I pick 8 that are at the top. But the thing is that you can't, I guess I could do a top 8 where I pick, I could go through my top 8 comic book companies, and believe me, there's a lot more than 8. Especially if you divide all the studios that make up Image Comics, because Image Comics isn't just Image. There's a bunch of different companies involved there. And I could just choose maybe my favorite superhero or something from each one of those. And maybe that would make for a good show, but each universe is its own universe, and to just pick one person out of it that's really your favorite, I think that does a bit of a disservice, because these universes are so huge now. So many of them have been around for... it's hard to believe that DC Comics in, about another, 5-10 years is going to be 100 years old. That's crazy. To think, when did Batman when did Superman first come out? What was Action Comics? Was that number 1? That was 1929 or 27? This is mind-boggling to consider that this has been an art form for so long. And comic books are so important because I'm reminded of something an old friend and hero of mine, Harlan Ellison, said. He said his argument was, he said it is, and he's an author. If you don't know Harlan Ellison, he makes great comic books too, Phoenix from the Ashes and all that. He made the argument that why he cannot understand why comic books are not taught in high school, why they are not considered a serious literary form, why they aren't held up, right up there with, Herman Melville and, J.D. Salinger and all the rest. How come they're not a part of the, the popular lexicon? They're part of the popular lexicon. Why aren't they part of perhaps of the academic lexicon? And I think that's a great point to bring up. And forget about comic book movies. Fuck comic book movies, or at least fuck most of them. Okay, I really don't care about them. Maybe that would be an interesting top 8 to do, and you can let me know if you want to hear it, where I do the top 8 comic book movies. Did I already do that? I don't think I did that. And I won't give it away what I think the best ones are, but it's certainly not most of the modern, Marvel movies. And I'm sure, I'll mention some of it as we go along with this first one here that we're doing, this first in the series. But they're so important. The comic books themselves, they are, they're very much the first mass media form, or not the first, but in many ways they are the first modern mass media entertainment. They are pamphlets. Pamphlets were were the efficient way. Once we got out of the woodcut and, you end up with the Gutenberg press and all these different things, and the idea of printing becomes something that more people can do, that's not controlled by the church or by, just some well-funded, feudal lord or something. When printing came to the masses, the pamphlet became the way that you disseminated information in a very quick fashion. It was how it was done. You think of just famous sayings from, like George Washington, say, during the Revolutionary War, the importance of the pamphlets of Thomas Paine, how Thomas Paine's pen was as important as any rifleman, right? Or as any army. And so, pamphlets, that was the thing. It was a big deal. Now, comic books are effectively pamphlets, but they are pamphlets that are designed to entertain instead of necessarily inform, even though they certainly do that. Comic books have more so, I think, than film, and maybe even more so than music, though probably not. If anything, it's a close second. But more so than, other than music, more so probably than any other form of entertainment, they are so subversive. They are so, they were on top of various cultural revolutions. They really were. From drugs to really even sex to so many other things. And people knew this. That's why in the 40s, it'd be interesting just to do like a history of comic books in general. That's why, in the 30s and 40s and whatever, you ended up with the Comic Books Code Authority of America, or whatever the hell that was called. You had that code that up until really the 90s, every company was trying to follow. Even though Marvel finally, when Joe Quesada took over, they issued it. They said, get this out of here. We're not going to follow the Comic Book Code Authority, or the Comic Book Authority codes, any longer. And largely a lot of, even when the Comic Book Authority, was out there, when they had their code that you had to follow, a lot of the artists and the writers, again, very subversive, they snuck in things that the Comic Book Authority, Code Authority, didn't even notice. But there's a reason that was created in the first place, because people saw that, holy shit, if this stuff gets out there, the comic books is such a powerful medium, because it's that beautiful combination of the written word, of great writing and great artistry at the same time. And it, it can last, and you don't need, and here's the other beautiful thing, right? You don't need to go to the theater to see it. It doesn't require any power. You can just break out the comic book and you have it forever, and you could read it in the woods. I agree that I agree with the detractors of comic books that it is an incredibly powerful medium within which to inform, entertain, etc. Of course, I don't agree with censorship in any way, shape, or form. I'm an anarchist. Anyway, so comic books this is not kid stuff. And for a long time, and in many ways, it really never has been. It has always been for adults. It's been written by adults, and even when you thought that it was for kids, usually the adults were sneaking in some stuff that you wouldn't figure out until later. So what I'm going to do here is, again, instead of go over I'm going to break this down into a series, because this one is going to be about DC and Marvel. I think that's the important one to get out of the way, because those are the big heavies. That's usually the ones that everybody knows. And so I'll talk about, who my favorite characters are, or my favorite comics, or my favorite series. And I'm going to kind of mix this up a bit, which actually the patron, the emailer recommended. Say, mix it up. Is the story arc a big deal? Are the issues a big deal? Whatever. And so I'm going to cover it, I'm going to mix that up to where there's the favorite character, favorite comic, I'm just... And I'll do that probably across the board. So, this one will be DC and Marvel. Maybe the next one will be maybe Valiant and Dark Horse. And we'll just go down the list. There's hell, I'll bring this up here. This is one, just to give you something that maybe you feel like you already know everything about, DC and Marvel. And if you do, that's great. But I'll bring up something that I don't know how exactly I would fit it onto a list. Maybe I could put it onto a part 3, but I want to mention it in the first place, is that there is one comic book company that, I read everything that they came out with. I made sure to buy and read and just consume every single comic book that this company came out with. It was a very ingenious comic book company. So before we get into the DC and Marvel list. And like I said, in future weeks, we'll cover other companies, maybe we'll do 2 at a time or something, and we'll break those down. And then I also want to talk a little bit about DC and Marvel and where they fit into kind of the comic book mythology, or, the comic book culture at the moment, because things have changed drastically. So, but I want to start this off with, this is a bit of a cheat. It's not in the top 8, but a comic book company that like I said, I read every single series that they came out with, was a company called CrossGen. Okay, and CrossGen, it was started by Mark Waid, who's very, very famous for the work he did with Captain America, as well as Superman, and also, so Ron Mars is bigger. So that was the other guy that was involved with CrossGen, was Ron Mars. Ron Mars was big with Green Lantern. He has probably the most famous Green Lantern run ever. And there was a few other people, but they made this company called CrossGen. And the unique thing about CrossGen, and it's just CrossGen. The unique thing about this was that it started off originally with like 4 or 5 titles, but everything was really within the same universe. And even though it took place in different times, and actually maybe different multiverses, but it was still within, sort of the same idea. Everything was really connected. Like, they really made sure it was connected. Like, you could read, now comic book companies do this all the time, where, they have their big event series, like once a year, there's a big crossover event. Well, CrossGen, the entire company was a crossover event. And so it made sense. Each one you could read on its own, but then you got a broader understanding of sort of this mystery that existed within the CrossGen universe if you read everything. Like, there is these things called sigils, okay? And they were, I don't want to this is one where I really don't want to spoil it for you. If you really want to go and like read CrossGen, good luck. You're not going to really find any trade paperbacks of it. The company went out of business, over a decade ago. It's really a pity that it did, because they had something special going on. But they, you can find, there's torrents out there of all the, where there's a major CrossGen collection. And unfortunately, the ultimate story arc that CrossGen was delivering with all of its titles never really finished. It'd take forever. Like, I could do a whole episode talking about CrossGen, but there were so many, like, there was a great series. One of my favorite series within it was called Crux. And it was about Atlanteans, and I won't give anything away further than that. But, like, again, it put all of this stuff within like a giant universe, and everything sort of came together. And you knew there was this huge mystery that each character was really trying to solve in between doing whatever the hell else they were doing. It was so cool. Like, there was nothing. It was like as Babylon 5 was to television, to where, before Babylon 5, the idea of doing story arcs, 5-year, say, story arcs on a television show was unheard of. Nobody ever did that. Now everybody does it. That idea, as Babylon 5 was to introducing the world to that, really CrossGen changed, I think, the comic book landscape. Because then suddenly, it's interesting that around that time, Marvel tried to do it, and actually I'll get into that. That's going to be a part of this top 8. But around that time, not long after that company went under, suddenly, this talk starts to come around, say, in DC and Marvel, and this segues nicely, about rebooting their universes. Like, suddenly Marvel does the Ultimate Marvel universe, right? Which was just insanely popular. And again, because really they followed CrossGen's model, where they said, before, DC and Marvel, there was some, there was some connection to where, like, these different aspects of, these different characters, they'd meet up in Justice League, and there would be crossover events and all this. But it wasn't like where the whole universe really had, like, kind of an underlying goal or underlying mystery, or like where an event in a completely separate comic book, whether, without it being like part of a miniseries or something, would absolutely affect and come up later in a comic book that takes place somewhere else, or like in a completely different area. That was the beauty that CrossGen really delivered. And it's interesting that Marvel and DC started doing that, and they did. Marvel started it with with the Ultimate Marvel series. Of course, they had the Ultimates, Ultimate X-Men, Ultimate Spider-Man. Ultimate Spider-Man was the first one, and all that. So anyway, CrossGen, if you want to get started on something that maybe you never heard of, but was just a phenomenal, I mean, you have an entire company's worth that you get to read. That is so good, so interconnected, really enjoyable. And the torrents you'll find are great because a lot of the torrents they will explain some of what, like say Mark Waid or Ron Mars or some of the other guys had in mind for how they wanted to tie up everything at the end of the CrossGen universe effectively. And also you'll get good reading orders too available. That's the beauty of a lot of comic book torrents. Or like, another great thing in comic book torrents is the DCP archive editions. Okay. And this is where like companies like Marvel and DC will come out with either what they call their archive editions, or they'll come out with their masterworks or their essential editions, where it takes, story arcs that existed and it kind of puts them all into one book, even if it wasn't like, say, one series. Okay, but it's like a shorter, 5-6 issue kind of miniseries or story arc that just covered other ones. DCP archive editions, if you look those up on a torrent site, which Kick-Ass Torrents is back, baby, go for it. If you look them up on that, in the search, you're going to find like just some of the greatest comic book events that ever happened, and they compile them in a great chronological, like it's a really custom fashion, but a great way to experience those stories and read them better than anyone was able to back when these things would have started. Say like stuff from New Genesis, with DC, where you have War of the Gods. Or even some other things. DCP archive editions, these guys are doing, for lack of a better phrase, they are doing the Lord's work, or as I would say, they're doing the Dark Lord's work. I mean, it's phenomenal what you can get your hands on as far as that goes. I mean, if you're not already getting the hint, look, I could talk about comic books forever. I mean, I am so nuts about these things. And in maybe one of the series, I'll talk about kind of how I got started reading comic books. And all of that, I maybe people would find that interesting. You can let me know. And if you have something particular you wanted me to talk about, I certainly can, when it comes to the whole comic book thing. So anyway, getting into our top 8, let's talk a little bit about, because again, this top 8 in particular is all going to be about DC and Marvel, which are the two heavies. Certainly the first thing that people think about when they think about comic books. I mean, granted, a lot of people don't even know that there's a difference. Like they have no idea that Superman and Spider-Man exist in two different universes, but they do. So, anyway, but yeah, DC and Marvel, I'm very critical of them as late, and this largely has to do with that. Really, and I've talked about this on past Patreon episodes, on Q&As particularly, and I've talked about it on Sovryn Tech here and there, but. In the past, since 2011, they have rebooted their universes almost as many times as there have been years. Like, you had Marvel, which, yeah, they did the Ultimates thing, and this is unbelievable. So the Ultimates thing was a reboot of the Marvel Universe, and even though they continued on with the standard Marvel Universe. But there was a conversation at the time when Ultimates started, with Ultimate Spider-Man, and then, they did Ultimate Iron Man, and they did Ultimates and Ultimate X-Men and all that. When they started that, there were a lot of talks at Marvel that, hey, we're just going to phase out the primary Marvel Universe, and we're just going to have the Ultimate, Marvel Universe be the thing. Now, that never happened, and kind of good thing that it didn't, in a way, because they ended up rebooting the Ultimate Marvel Universe, too. Which was just so weird. Like eventually they get to the point where they want to do a bunch of number ones again. And I understand why companies like to do number ones, because a number one, usually it's comparable. The best analogy would be it's New Year's and everybody's going to the gym, right? Like on New Year's Day, on January 1st, tons of gym memberships. And in fact, most gyms make most of their money on, in December/January, February. That makes up for the lack of money they make the whole rest of the year, right? Comic book companies, to some degree, it's the same way. Their number ones, when they come out with a new series, they end up, if it's, I mean, and really they do this, if it's a Wonder Woman #1 or if it's a Wolverine #1 or something, they'll make enough money off of that #1 because people think it's a great, jumping on point. And sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. But that will make enough money to fund like 20 other titles, So I get it, why they do it. I don't like it, but I do understand why that happens and why they do it. But regardless, so, Marvel was already doing it with the Ultimate Universe, but like they just started, DC did their big push for New 52, okay, in 2011, which they rebooted, that was a total reboot of the universe. And I got it. And I actually, like, at first I was like, yeah, no, this is pretty cool. I could get into this. I think this is going to be all right. But then they do another reboot where they do Rebirth, which is the most recent thing, which actually, story-wise has been pretty good. Like it's really, it's not bad, at all. But then they started doing weird things where they were bringing in characters from the other, DC has this whole thing where there's like 600, 700 some odd Earths. And like you have Earth 2, you have Earth 7, you have, all these different Earths. And they started bringing in, like, they brought in Superman from the original, continuity of DC, which that had its problems too, because you had the, Crisis on Infinity Earths back in the 80s, where they tried to, kind of tie all this up and get everything connected again and explain, why there's all these different characters, why are there so many different Superboys, why are there so many different Supergirls, blah, 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 blah. And they tried to bring that all, all together to some degree, and then things still ended up getting convoluted after the fact. But so you had like these 3 reboots that didn't really seem to work within DC itself. Then you had, within Marvel did, where they had kind of the all-new Marvel, or they had what did they call it? Like the new universe or something, where they started doing a reboot after the Marvel movies really started taking off, and then the characters kind of started taking on characteristics from the Marvel movies. Then they did the all-new Marvel universe just this past that was like last year. That was when, if you remember, there was like the Apple Iron Man, where Iron Man looked like he came out of, Johnny Ives' lab or something. And then they rebooted again, and now, frankly, I mean, as far as Iron Man goes, now we have Doctor Doom as Iron Man. And then there's the young, the black girl playing Ironheart, or, being the character Ironheart and really taking over the Iron Man title, which I think is wonderful. So there was just these constant, like in the past 5 years, there have just been reboot after it seemed like almost every year they were completely rebooting each universe within Marvel and DC. And I just got sick of it. Regardless of how good some of it might have been. Like I actually liked, speaking of Iron Man, I liked when they had him, what was it, Superior Iron Man? And he ended up being, and this is when he had the white suit, like the Apple suit as they called it. Where he ends up kind of being a bad guy. I was like, oh, this is great. But of course, they're not going to stick with it. Just like they did, they came out with, or maybe that was Superior as well. Well, there was the Superior Spider-Man where Doc Ock was in Peter Parker's body. And, Dr. Octopus. And it was awesome. It was a great series, but we kind of always knew, God damn it, they're going to bring back Peter Parker at some point. As fantastic as it was to have Doc Ock as Spider-Man, because, he would be a lot more of a badass, sometimes even do a little more villainous things than Spider-Man would do. So, yeah, I got sick of the remakes with DC and Marvel. So, admittedly, I don't read DC or Marvel too seriously anymore. I will get into that as we go down this list. But historically, yeah, they were the main companies that I read. Of course, I mean, in the 80s and 90s, who the fuck doesn't read Batman? Who doesn't read Superman, especially after the death of Superman? I mean, that was huge. So anyway, let's start going down this list. And I'm actually going to start it off. I'm not going to start it off with a character. I'm going to start it off with a storyline and kind of a relaunch. While we're talking about relaunches and all these relaunches, there was a time where I thought it was a great idea. And I really liked what they were doing. And the idea at the time, if you read, of course, Comic Book News, if anybody remembers that, I don't even know if they still publish it anymore. Ever since I've gone totally digital, I don't Sadly, I haven't walked into a comic book shop in a little while, and as much as I love them, I think they're the greatest places on earth. But they used to have the comic book news, and it was this, little newsletter, effectively, literally on newspaper, that would tell you what's coming up and everything. And I read that religiously. Like, I wanted to know everything, and you'd read Wizard magazine, right, and all that. I remember, reading in comic book news that this was coming. This event was coming. That Marvel was actually going to cancel 5 titles, really, even though it would be reborn as 4 titles. And the 5 titles that they were going to cancel, I mean, this was like, as soon as you read that was the headline, and total, if there was such a thing as clickbait at the time, this was clickbait. Okay. The 4 titles that they were going to cancel, they're going to cancel Fantastic Four, which was one of the longest running titles in Marvel history. They're going to cancel the Avengers. They were going to cancel, and this was in 1996. Just to give you time frame, time frame is important when it comes to comic books. This is in 96, 97. Okay, Iron Man. So Fantastic Four, Avengers, Iron Man, and Captain America, and they were going to cancel Thor as well. The biggest titles that Marvel had, largely, even though Iron Man wasn't as big a deal then as he would become, after the Iron Man movies came out. So these 5 titles were getting canned. But then when you read on, it said they were going to come back in their own universe, and this is going to be after the Onslaught miniseries, which the Onslaught, well, not miniseries, but series. The Onslaught series, the Onslaught crossover event that happened was where this character who is effectively the kind of the grandkid of Professor X, it's all a very long story, who's this super powerful mutant, who ends up, like, at the end of the Onslaught series, ends up, like, breaking Captain America's shield, which was unheard of at the time, and kills off all these characters. But what you find out is that, when Onslaught kills these characters, that Reed Richards of the Fantastic Four, his son, Franklin Richards, who is effectively a mutant, and very young, like, somehow transports these heroes that died into an alternative universe that Franklin Richards created, because Franklin Richards is just so powerful. And when he, this other universe that he creates was going to be a new series, and a new universe that Marvel was going to really push, and they were calling it Heroes Reborn. Now, that whole Franklin Richards thing that I told you about was an afterthought. Like, that wasn't a way to explain what happened and how they were going to bring these characters back, because Heroes Reborn came to an end after only a year. Because the initial idea, according to comic book news, was that this was going to become eventually the new Marvel Universe. Kind of like what I was talking about earlier with the Ultimate Marvel Universe, where Marvel was like, hey, this Ultimate Marvel Universe is so fucking popular. Let's just make this the prime universe for Marvel. The same idea was true for Heroes Reborn, but they were kind of testing it out. And sadly, the test did not go well. I don't know why, because I thought it was fucking great. Like, and I still, like, I read it regularly, because this was, in fact, really, maybe CrossGen got the idea from Heroes Reborn, because, like, they really tightly knit this comic book series. And there's a few great things about this, and I'll break into them, because the titles that ended up coming out of it was, again, they canceled 5, but they only brought back 4 of them. And so you had Fantastic Four, you had Avengers, you had Iron Man, and you had Captain America. Those were the 4 titles that made up this new Marvel universe called Heroes Reborn. Marvel brought in just some of the best writers and artists of the time. Rob Liefeld, I mean, all the greats were really working on Heroes Reborn. This was a huge fucking push, okay, to try and make this a big deal. And there were some great ideas, and what they were able to do wasn't so much, it wasn't necessarily different in that, like, because obviously with the Onslaught series and so many others, they had done crossover events before at Marvel. That wasn't really anything new. Okay, what they did that was unique was the origin stories were able to get changed, and they were able to create a common origin with a lot of these characters, especially you got to have this, and this is the best part of it for me. So you ended up, like with Iron Man, you had Tony Stark. You had Tony Stark, of course, Fantastic Four. You had Reed Richards, right? And then, of course, with the Fantastic Four, you had the Fantastic Four's, great villain, which is who? Dr. Doom, one of my personal favorite Marvel characters. And so all of like the brilliant people, and then you had the Avengers too, right? So you had Hank Pym and all these guys, all these really, all the brains in Marvel were a part of these comic book series. And you ended up being able to give them all of like this common origin story where they all went to college together. Like, Dr. Doom and all of them, not that this is where the comic book started, but this was a kind of a backstory and an underlying, plot point and plot device that was able to get used over and over again and instantly gave this very new universe a lot of history. It was a brilliant move. And so what they did is they had like where all these guys were Reed Richards, Hank, Bruce Banner, all of them were really a part of what was called the Knights of the Atomic Round Table. That's what they called themselves because they were just the smartest guys in every room, right? And this is what they called themselves in college. Now, the comics don't take place in their college years. It takes place much older, or much longer after that. But it gave them all, kind of that common origin. And that was so cool because everybody kind of had this history with each other that you never really got so much, that interconnected history that you never got in the Prime Marvel universe. And so it really worked. I thought it was really good for that. And everything that was going on, you got to redo some of the big stories. Like the first encounter with Hulk. I mean, understand, this is why a lot of people like the Marvel movies, because you're getting to cover all of these huge story arcs that Marvel had previously. And you get to relive them and perhaps enhance them with some more modern sensibilities. Not that there was anything wrong with them previously. You can read them and they're just as good, today as they were, 20 years ago or 30 years ago or 50 years ago. So Heroes Reborn just did especially like what they did with the Fantastic Four. They made the Fantastic Four like ridiculously sexy. I wasn't a huge Fantastic Four fan until Heroes Reborn came around. But the more important thing that happened, and the previously mentioned CrossGen actually fell prey to this as well, so have other companies that I was at least at one point a big fan of, like Zenoscope and some of these other ones, okay, like with Grimm Fairy Tales, where the real beauty of Heroes Reborn was that you could keep track of four series. All you had was, again, Fantastic Four, Avengers, Iron Man, Captain America. That's all there was in this universe. And so it was very easy to read the entire universe, and it was also easy to afford. And that was, now I know at scale that becomes problematic. You can, but in the popular perception, and obviously with the business heads at these comic book companies, their opinion is you cannot just survive on 4 titles, right? Even though they could have brought in a few more. I mean, even if they brought it up to 10, maybe, it'd still be affordable, and it'd still be, everybody would be able to follow along without having to read, literally 200, 300 comics, say, a month, right? Or however much is required when a lot of these crossover events happened. I remember with some crossover events, just to follow the entire crossover event, I'm not kidding, I would be paying $300 a week. Like I'm thinking of, was it Joker's Last Laugh? I mean, I paid out of my fucking nose, for that, to have, to be able to read that entire series. It just got ridiculous. So it was really refreshing, even though Last Laugh came after Heroes Reborn, and is DC, not Marvel. It was really refreshing, I think, even then, when there wasn't so much of a saturation of so many comics, even though there was a ton of X-Men titles. But it was so refreshing to just like, okay, I can read this entire universe, and even as a young person, you could very easily afford, with your allowance or something, buying all of these titles. And I mean, that's one of the things I really loved about it. And it's a shame because, even like a lot of upstart companies today in the comic book industry, they sort of do the right thing where they are living off of, say, 2 or 3 very popular titles. But then they think, oh, let's do some more. And they keep introducing more. And then eventually it gets to the point to where they miss what makes their title so popular, or what makes their universe so popular, is that people can keep track of it. People have time for it, and people can afford it. and this is a real failing with with comic book companies. And honestly, the numbers bear it out. And maybe this is what they think. I don't know. I don't exactly know what their thinking is, because graphic novels, trade paperbacks, TPBs, whatever you want to call it, okay, where it's a collection of, say, a story arc or a collection of a bunch of issues that instead of selling for $70, they can sell for only $15 to $20. These are the most popular way to get comic books today. And this is the way that most people read them. Why? Because it's affordable, and they're getting what actually matters to these giant story arcs that comic book companies do every year. Which is, again, just saying the story arc thing. There's a time and place, but once a year or more is not the time and place. With every fucking title in your universe is not the time and place. Okay, not for Marvel and DC anyway, in my opinion. So Heroes Reborn was really cool. It's a complete series that you can read. It sadly, for whatever reason, it didn't live up to expectations. And after a year, they came up with that whole Franklin Richards created a universe after Onslaught storyline, and they put it out there, and they just brought everybody back. The Fantastic Four came back, Iron Man came back, and all these different people came back. But it was an interesting experiment. I thought it was awesome. I think the comics read great. They look great. You get some of the best artistry in comic book history inside of Heroes Reborn. I think that's why it's still so well known, is because it really did deliver quality comics. I guess it didn't sell, or it didn't do what Marvel needed at the time, and this is before they were owned by Disney. But it made it happen, and it was an interesting experiment into what now everybody's just fucking rebooting and relaunching their entire universes. It's well, whatever, they do what they do. So Heroes Reborn, that's I'm going to put that at number 8, and we can move on from that. How about we get into a character, and let's switch companies, shall we? And go from Marvel, and let's go to, and I'm not doing these in any particular order as far as like which one's the greatest or anything like that. These are just, they're all great. So, but let's go to let's go to DC with something, and on my list here I'm gonna go with Batman. I can't begin to tell you how much Batman means to me. If there's a number 1 on the list, this would probably end up at number 1. But Batman is just the stuff, I mean, Batman's Batman. I remember, I forget what exactly the voting was for, but he was voted the greatest comic book character of all time. And he really is. Superman certainly is the most, I think is arguably the most iconic. Like, everybody knows who Superman is. Everybody knows that symbol when they see it. But Batman is like neck and neck right up there. And as far as like overall quality over the decades, and again, almost 100 years, overall quality, Batman has really stood the test of time, as always just consistently having amazing storylines, amazing stories, and Batman's probably the king of the single issue, where you can do one, now it seems like there's, and it's really sad. In the comic book industry, it really seems like there's no such thing as doing a single issue story anymore. Now everything's 3 or 4 issues, and that's fine. It's just, in the 80s and 90s, most of the time it was just one issue, one story. It was a complete package. And Batman, I think, probably delivers the best overall one issue, one story. And also Batman is incredible at the ability to deliver like a real moral message. To have a moral story within that one issue as well. Or if it's within a story arc, I mean, then it's a whole other thing. And I think that's part of why Batman, like, there's a couple of reasons why Batman, I think, stands above them all. One is, of course, that you can actually be Batman. Like, well, all right, I'm going to save some of that. But bottom line being, he's human. You could be him. You cannot be from Krypton. Number 2, though, or the second point that I want to bring up is that Batman just has really been able to, again, it can always be a moral story. Even if it's a comedic one, it can always be a moral story at the end, where Batman is wrestling with so many demons, either in himself or in his villains or in the cadre of supporting characters around him, like Robin or Batgirl or Nightwing or Batwoman or Red Hood, whoever it ends up being. or Oracle, right? I mean, and that's the other thing too, is Batman is where it seems like where DC started to say, okay, we're going to get past the comic book code authority, whatever, and we're, is that what it is? Comics Code Authority, whatever it is. That's where they started to be able to push beyond that. Okay. And that they were willing to, and people didn't seem to mind. Batman, I mean, also, other things that Batman has going for it. First off is that, like, there's been over the decades, Batman's character, like, Batman has seemingly decades where the character is very different. Like in the 60s, probably based upon the popularity, and rightly so, the popularity of the Batman 66 television series with Adam West and Burt Ward, the comic book kind of went with that and made it a little more kind of cheeky, or even campy, in the 60s. And also, like, they started doing more fantastic, like, and then you had the 70s where they started to do more fantastical storylines where Batman started encountering aliens. And, previous to that, things were very different. And then in the 80s, things started to get a little more serious, a little more darker. But then, of course, Frank Miller's, The Dark Knight Returns comes out, and then Batman completely changes. And, of course, Tim Burton's Batman movie, what was that, 87 or 89? That changes everything when that comes out. And Batman, after that, in many ways, once the 90s kicked in full swing, Batman kind of has stayed the same. Really. Like, I mean, you had the excellent, which could have easily made this list, the excellent Nightfall series, story arc, where Batman, has to deal with Bane, and Bane almost kills Batman. And then, what's his name? Jean Paul, he ends up becoming, the character of Azrael ends up having to become, becomes the new Batman and becomes this very vicious Batman. And then Bruce Wayne has to come back as Batman, blah, blah, blah. If you ever want to read, the best way to actually read that isn't even in the comic books, even though a lot of the panes, as it were, the comic book, or a lot of the panels in the comic books are some of the most iconic in history from the Nightfall series. But if you want to read it, there's the novelization of Nightfall, and that book, like, literally changed my life, because you got to get into the head of Batman. More so than, I mean, comic books now don't mind doing thought bubbles so much, and they've done them in the past, but, like, it never works out that great, because a lot of times, thoughts, writing down stream of consciousness in a novel, could take up entire paragraphs, as to where you don't have that luxury in a comic book. And so to really be able to get into the head of Batman, which the Nightfall novelization allowed for, was amazing. Like, so inspirational to me as a young person. Not saying good or bad, just saying that it definitely inspired me. So that's a great thing to read. That's one of the rare cases where the novel is better than the comic book. They just did a phenomenal job with that. So now, as far as, like, Batman being, like, you could actually be Batman, holy shit, did I try? Did I try? Kind of like I mentioned with Nightfall, where in that you find out that, Batman is, in his head, he's saying how he's to the point where he only sleeps 2 hours a week. And so me as a teenager, I was like, oh, well, I can do that. I'll pull that off. Now, of course, I can't do that. I couldn't do that. I tried. I tried really hard. But that was like, I mean, I was impressionable, and it's Batman. It's like, that's what you always wanted to be. I mean, I've said this all the time, that, everybody always asks a 6-year-old, like, who do you want to be when you get older? Or what do you want to be when you get older? And, at the time, this would be the 80s, everybody was like, well, I want to be an astronaut, I want to be a fireman, I want to be this. My answer was always the same from 6 years old on. I want to be Batman. I mean, now I don't want to be Batman, but, at the time, oh, fuck yeah. That was always my answer. So, I was really trying. I was like, okay, and yeah, here's the information. So I went for it, and you knew that Batman was human, and that's what gets so many people into it, is that you can more easily kind of fantasize, and I think a lot of people do have that fantasy, and men and women, understand that, like, I think as much as Men will say their favorite, or, that a lot of people, and there's been so many polls on this, where who's the greatest comic book character of all time, or who's your favorite, blah, blah, blah. Batman always wins. Understand that when you break down, those polls, that women voted for him as their favorite character as well. Like, women want to be Batman as much as men do. Okay? So, I mean, kudos to Batman for, for having that kind of gravitas. So yeah, Batman just a huge character. I mean, there are so many, and here's the so kind of the point I was getting to there, as far as like Batman being able to sustain himself or stay fresh over so many decades, and how he's like kind of the king of single issue storylines. He's also the king of like all the Elseworlds storylines, where Elseworlds is where it's kind of alternative universes without doing like a whole push, like say Heroes Reborn. Like there's the Vampire trilogy for the Elseworlds for Batman, phenomenal. Like anywhere you put Batman, he just works. He does such a great job. Much of that can be said for Superman as well, but Batman just always gets to that next level. Even in one of my favorite, see, this is what's so hard. I could do this whole list just on storylines. One of my favorite story arcs or storylines from DC that was in Elseworlds was Red Sun. Superman Red Sun, which is where Superman lands in Russia instead and, grows up to be a communist. And but Batman's fantastic in that. He's this rebel leader and he just does a phenomenal job, and you totally believe whatever role you put Batman in, regardless of how much you know about Batman's backstory. Like, you just totally know and you get it and it fits and it works, and it's so good. So Batman is easily, if there's a number one on this list, it's him. And I usually don't fall under the kind of the conventional, favorites. I don't fall under a person who has conventional taste in things, or that follows the crowd, should we say? But this is one where, look, it's just so goddamn true. What are you going to do about it? He is the best. He is the man. So yeah, I mean, easily, Batman tops my chart for all comic books. I mean, and there's plenty of comic books like that I read more religiously. Like, I don't follow, with the whole thing, ever since they did the Rebirth, I followed New 52 pretty heavy. And it was a challenge because it was called New 52 because there was 52 titles you had to read. I was reading all of them. And eventually, that wasn't feasible anymore. But like with Rebirth, I will get to the point where I read a good chunk of Rebirth. But I am definitely going to experience Rebirth in the graphic novel format, in the trade paperback format. When they have collections of these stories, I'll do it. Because New 52 was pretty early on fucking things up. Like, the stories were good, the writing was good, but the lengths to which they were drawing out some of this stuff was just too much for me. And so I just didn't want to keep up with it anymore. So yeah, Batman, I mean, there's not a bad comic in the bunch. Read them all. Read the Cult series. Read what happened with Jason Todd in the 80s. Read read Last Laugh. Read The Killing Joke. Read Digital Justice. I loved that series. Digital Justice is fantastic. Read Batman Beyond with Terry McGinnis. Batman Beyond is phenomenal. I love that whole universe in the future. And again, you still have Bruce Wayne there, largely. So yeah, so much great stuff. Anything you pick up Batman, you're in for a good time. So I don't need to really say much more on that, other than that, that's why I love it so much. Just so cool, and there's something to be said for the fact that he is like the human character, and that's part of his big appeal. And also the fact that, he gets to explore within himself and within, the various criminals that he takes on, and of course his various charges, his cadre of, like I said, or the superheroes around him, he kind of gets to explore their psyches as well. And so it has the rare ability to not just be rip-roaring action or adventure, but actually have a moral story at the end. All right, so we've got three in. We have Heroes Reborn, we got Batman. Let's go to Marvel's Batman, which is really what Iron Man is. Iron Man was, for a long time, my favorite Marvel character. And I've said this before on Sovereign Tech. I know I've said it on Q&A episodes on Patreon. But look, I'm proud of this, okay? There's a couple times where I've called shit, like I've predicted stuff years, if not a decade ahead of time. That something was going to happen, and it ended up happening. Iron Man is one of those. I'll tell you another one quick. I said, and in fact, you might even be able to search this. If the Sci-Fi Channel forums are still totally up from the 90s and they're searchable, you could find where I said, you know who would make a great Starship Captain? Scott Bakula. What happened? Like however many years later, Scott Bakula was the captain of the Enterprise, and he did do a hell of a job. Woo! So I can call shit. Now, you can't search this, but conversations I had in high school, okay, and this would have been the 90s, late 90s, with my friends was that, trust me. And I remember even having it on the phone, on the landline. I said, trust me. Whenever Marvel gets around, because this is when the X-Men movie started, I said, whenever Marvel gets around to making an Iron Man movie, it will be the greatest comic book movie ever. Because this character has so many flaws. There's so many things to explore about the guy that a lot of people can relate to. And he has, and also there's the fact that just like Batman, he's human. He just happens to be really smart and has this awesome suit. I said, believe me, it's going to be massive when they make a movie of him. And what happened when the fucking Iron Man movie came out? Pretty much everybody now says, maybe the only other one people would argue is that, like, the 79 Superman might be the bigger film, which I would argue that too, because that was amazing. But the first Iron Man movie, or Iron Man 2, or Iron Man 3, whatever one they choose, is the best comic book movie out there. It is the bar that everything else measures up to. And so I was right. Now, again, I knew this, and this was long before. Understand, Iron Man in the 90s he wasn't a sideshow, but he definitely was not at the level of popularity now where every kid wanted to be Iron Man. Most kids didn't even know who Iron Man was. I had an Iron Man tie. I fucking knew who he was. Okay, and I dug him because he was, when I started off, when I was a kid, I started off reading DC and really DC only. Okay, and then I remember, like, in the 4th grade, they were passing out, propaganda sheets, which was a comic book about drugs, an anti-drug comic book. They had Captain America in it. I was like, who's this Captain America? He's like, oh, Marvel, okay. And I mean, I'd heard of Captain America, but like I never really experienced, I never bothered to like actually buy a Marvel comic. And I was like, oh, well, this is kind of cool. And so then I look into kind of the Marvel universe at the comic book store, and I find out about Iron Man. It's like, oh, well, he's like Batman. I want that. And that's really, in many ways, because if people were invested in the Marvel universe, you want a Batman-like character. Tony Stark has some darkness. The guy is a recovering alcoholic. I mean, there's a whole bunch of other things there, going on for him. The shrapnel and all that stuff that he, at any given moment he could die. Kind of. I mean, there's a lot of tragedy around him that makes for a very engaging story. So Iron Man, that's really how I got into him, and he was my favorite for a long time, really up until like the recent surge of popularity around Iron Man, where everybody likes Iron Man. He was my favorite guy, and I don't dislike him because everybody likes him now. I just like they've sort of, Iron Man has sort of changed to where they're making him more and more like Robert Downey Jr. than Tony Stark. And not to say that he does a bad job of playing Tony Stark, he does a phenomenal job, but you lose, I feel like you kind of lose something. And they made him a lot more kid-friendly in the comics, as to where in the 80s and 90s, the one thing you could count on with Iron Man is that there'd be women all over the place, and he'd be having a good time living the high life because, he's the billionaire playboy and all that. And that was kind of the one advantage I think that he had over Batman, was that he was able to be Tony Stark a lot more than Batman was able to, or he was able to explore Tony Stark a lot more than Batman was able to explore Bruce Wayne. And so you never got a lot of Bruce Wayne, as to where, with Iron Man, you get a ton of Tony Stark, perhaps more so than even Iron Man. Which, by the way, I love it when the Batman comics do a lot more exploration of Bruce Wayne. I revel in that, and they can do that all the more that they want to. I really enjoyed when they switched from like Nightwing being Dick Grayson more, and he ended up being like an agent for various organizations or something, and he was just a human, and he wasn't Nightwing or anything. He was just an agent wearing all black. Obviously, you can see why that would appeal to me. Anyway, so Iron Man has a few different story arcs that are very interesting. There was the Armor Wars, of which there was at least 2 or 3. His origin stories, whenever they've done a rehash of his origin stories, not to where it affected the larger continuity, but just where they tell it, like say in a miniseries or something, are always great reads. He has one of the best. I mean, it's such a simple origin story, but somehow it always ends up being really cool. He's also really where Iron Man particularly shines is when he is in the kind of not the supporting role, but when he's not when it's not his own title, he is like always the best supporting role for like say in the Avengers, even though everybody's a supporting role really in my opinion in that. And just, kind of his comedy, his wit, and again, the fact that like unlike all the other comic book characters, his morals were significantly looser. So I always enjoyed Iron Man for that. But today, Iron Man's not that anymore. They don't really let him do that. I loved it when they did as I mentioned earlier, when they're doing I think it was like the Superior Iron Man or something like that, where they were having him. He was effectively a bad guy, and I was like, oh, this is great. Like that was awesome reading because his ego just ran away. But of course they ended that. Well, there you go. And they did do so when they did like the Marvel Now, that's the latest reboot. They did a re-exploration of his origin story where you come to find out that actually he is, and I thought this was so stupid, that he's like a product of genetic engineering and he's designed to be like this weapon. It was really stupid. Just a terrible, and they started it with the number 1 and it went to like issue 12 or something, that's way too long. But it was so dumb that they did that, as to where previously all of his origin stories were phenomenal. So anyway, now of course Tony Stark is not a part of the picture. Presently in Marvel Now, you have Ironheart, which is the teenage black girl who's really taken over the Iron Man comic, and then you have also I love the fact that now Dr. Doom is Iron Man now. It is so cool, and the title is The Infamous Iron Man. I just think. I love Dr. Doom as a character, and to kind of have him sort of take on the good guy role, but then still be the real badass and all that. Like it fits. If anybody were really to replace Iron Man, he's perfect. He's absolutely perfect for it. So it is, like I said, it is the only Marvel title that I'm really reading right now. Is the Infamous Iron Man, and I can't wait for new issues when they come. I hope they let it ride. Let it keep on going, because they really don't. Marvel does not do enough anymore with Doctor Doom when he's not the star of some title. You don't get anything out of it. I mean, there's been great stuff that's been done with Doctor Doom. There's Doom 2099, which the whole 2099 series is great from Marvel. There was the Book of Doom. I mean, they've done great shit with Doctor Doom, but they've never really done enough. And this is that one spot where I think you could put him and it works, and he could carry on this title. I think he could carry it on into perpetuity. I mean, you can let him go evil at times, but, kind of keep him with the whole Iron Man moniker, I think. I really think it works. So Iron Man, even though I don't care for the modern Tony Stark, I certainly love this new direction that they're pitching, which is the Infamous Iron Man, which has Doctor Doom, in the role. I fucking love it. It's so great. All right, so let's move on to another character. Let's switch sides. Let's switch gears. We'll go to Green Lantern here with DC. Now, Green Lantern, I don't just like this. This is tough because, and again, this is why, and I appreciate the emailer who requested, doing a comic book top 8, because it's so hard to say what your favorite is, because these things are, again, they are massive fucking universes. With Green Lantern, you're really not just talking about one character. You're talking about the Green Lantern Corps. You're talking about you're talking about an entire story, a universe within a universe in a very real sense. Obviously, I grew up with Hal Jordan being the Green Lantern. Also, I grew up with the Green Lantern Corps consisting of like John Stewart and Guy Gardner, who was an awesome Green Lantern. You had the dog that was a Green Lantern. You had all these different characters. And then, of course, they switched over to Kyle Rayner. The 80s was a really formative time. In the early 90s, very formative time for the whole Green Lantern idea. In fact, DC started to take very seriously a more science fiction angle for their print, for their entire universe. And you ended up with, at the time, there were 3 different organizations that were all about dealing with interplanetary threats and, dealing with like literally going out into the universe, not just the DC universe, but the universe outside of Earth. You had the Dark Stars, which could have made this list in a heartbeat. I love Dark Stars. It was hardcore, super serious science fiction comic books, but they were superheroes, and it worked. You had Legion at the time, not Legionnaires, even though it was based off of Legionnaires, but it was L. It was an acronym, Legion, L.E.G. You had Legion, and then you had, of course, the Green Lantern Corps, which is the most famous of the bunch and the most consistent. And then, like they started bringing up the storyline with Oa, the planet Oa, which is where the Green Lanterns get all their power from the Guardians, and that's when you meet Ganthet, and you had that great storyline of Ganthet's tale. Just fantastic. Just an amazing series. Green Lantern has always been great. It is the one series that has absolutely consistently gotten better over time because they have delved deeper into the mythology. Because then what you ended up getting was like in the Blackest Night story arc, which was so popular that it's still considered canon. It was still considered canon even in the New 52, and it's still considered canon in the New Rebirth series. What this was about, like, suddenly you find out there's not just Green Lanterns. You always knew there was a Yellow Lantern that was based on fear, and that's what Sinestro used, which I love that character too. But you ended up finding out that there's like this entire emotional spectrum of rings, of power rings out there. There's like, there's the orange ring for avarice. There's the red ring for rage and hate. There's indigo, and there's the star sapphires, and then there's black rings for death, and there's white rings for light. There's the blue rings for hope. You have all these different rings, and like they created this really exciting. It's kind of like what happened with Marvel and the X-Men, to where the X-Men became such an exciting subgenre within Marvel itself, like sub-universe effectively, that. This is what happened with Green Lanterns, is it became so big and so popular, it became DC's X-Men effectively, to where, you had superheroes, but then you had the Lanterns. That was a whole other thing. Just like in Marvel, you had the X-Men, and then you had everybody else, right? Or you had mutants, and then you had everybody else. So Green Lantern, and all of those storylines have been great. So many, or even like when Hal Jordan goes bad in the 90s when he became Parallax, that was awesome. Huge fan of the entire Green Lantern saga and series and all of its different incarnations, including like Ion, the character of Ion, which is like the embodiment of the green ring, for willpower. That's what green represents, is willpower. I can still, to this day, I can quote, the Green Lantern oath, in darkest day and blackest night, no evil shall escape my sight, beware my power, Green Lantern's light. I got you, baby. Like it was. If it wasn't for Batman, Green Lantern would be at the top of that list as far as DC. It is so cool. And the other cool thing that's happened lately. It was getting at certain points. It's gotten ridiculous, I'll admit, to where other DC heroes will get like a lantern ring of some kind, be it Blue Lantern or Green Lantern or whatever they end up with. One of my favorite memes is a shot from one of the issues of Green Lantern where they give Batman a Green Lantern ring, and it says on the meme, it says like the goddamn Batman, or Green Lantern Batman, because somebody thought that giving Batman a weapon based upon willpower was a good idea, and you're just like, the universe, it's fucking over. Giving Batman a Green Lantern ring, it's done, baby. Oh man, that's so good. So, but anyway, so there's points where, not that I think Batman having a Green Lantern ring is ridiculous. It makes a lot of sense. But there's points where, okay, we didn't have to give this person a ring. We didn't have to give everybody a ring. Come on. But what's been able to happen with, and it's worked really well in the past few years, is where, because Green Lantern is effectively a science fiction title, mixing it in and doing crossovers with whole other franchises has worked really well. Like Green Lantern and Star Trek, where they've done those crossovers, have been wild successes, hugely popular, and they work because Green Lantern is, again, a science fiction title, so it fits. Then we have this year, we have the Planet of the Apes and Green Lantern crossover coming, where Cornelius, the scientist from the first Planet of the Apes, is going to end up being a Green Lantern. That's brilliant, and it works. Because, again, it's a science fiction title. So Green Lantern has a very unique, and I don't think Marvel has any title that could really do this either. Even though, like, the Star Trek X-Men crossovers were cool back in the 90s, you really couldn't. I don't think DC or Marvel doesn't have anything that could do this, where DC has its science fiction property that could mix so well with all these other franchises. And, I mean, it's fantastic for that alone. In fact, we're going to get into, we might get deep into the weeds here. I'm going to bring up, I don't know if I'm going to make this one of the eights, but one of the other characters, and this is such a strength that DC has overall, is its science fiction elements that it started developing in the 80s. If you're wondering, and I'll answer this now, if you're curious, which company do I like better out of DC and Marvel? Well, DC. DC wins actually very easily for me. There's a lot of people, but this argument goes both ways. There's a lot of people that say that, DC is for adults, Marvel is for kids. That's been being said for a very long time. Okay, there's people who want to say that it's supposed to be the other way around. I can't agree with that. Certainly not historically. It's just not true. DC has done so much more under their various imprints, and even within their own universe, that is far more adult oriented. I mean, it's crazy. But anyway, so with Green Lantern, like I said, when they started bringing on more of the emotional spectrum and they started bringing in, a lot more mythology within, like, Green Lantern as overall, like the character of Ion and, all these other, Atrocitus and all these other different characters, they brought in, was it Sovryn, who is a Daxamite. Now, Daxamite is interesting. This is where all the fun science fiction stuff comes in. Okay, you have a planet called Daxam. Now, there's been different incarnations of this, certainly, because, again, continuities get rebooted a lot. But you have this planet called Daxam. And Daxam, you find out, is where some people, like, from Krypton ended up going to. Like this was a planet when Krypton was being destroyed that they ended up on Daxam and started working with, these Daxamites. So Daxamites are effectively cousins of Kryptonians. Now, there's a couple of very famous Daxamites. One of them is Largand, who you might know from the 70s, who's in Legion of Superheroes, but who also ended up, and this is where continuities get kind of a mess, who also ended up becoming the character Valor. Which Valor became a big deal in another one of my favorite story arcs within DC, which was the Eclipso, The Darkness Within, which was a huge crossover story arc in like 1990, I think, or 91. And this is where this character Eclipso, could effectively replicate himself or herself, depending at the time, into other heroes, like could kind of take over their bodies and everything, and they could sort of all act as one. Kind of like a Sense8 situation of sorts. So Eclipso ends up getting, control of the character of Valor, or Largand, this Daxamite. Now, what's interesting about that is because as Eclipso in the story arc of Eclipso: The Darkness Within, as he's taking over more and more superheroes, like even Hal Jordan, Wonder Woman, and all that, like everybody's, at the time, all the comic book fans were all just kind of waiting. We're like, okay, but he's not going to get Superman, and Superman's going to kick his ass. Like that was the thinking at the time. But then you find out very early on that he has access to to Largand, to Valor, the character Valor, which Valor ended up with his own miniseries after the end of the Eclipso Darkness Within, or not miniseries, whole series after the Eclipso story arc. And it was a great series. It's tremendous, a great character. I love Largand. And you're like, well, who's this Valor? What's the big deal here? When you find out that he's a Daxamite, when you find out exactly who that is, that it's a Daxamite, and that they are effectively cousins to the Kryptonians, then suddenly, oh shit, Eclipso has a character as powerful as Superman. That has history in the universe. That was huge. That was just a major crazy thing. So the whole idea, the characters, are the Daxamite kind of culture, and the Daxamite characters are really cool because you can have a lot more of them, and it makes sense that they're like almost as powerful as Superman. Of course, they have a different weakness. Like kryptonite doesn't hurt them, but lead does. Like lead can kill them almost instantly. So they do have weaknesses, but yeah, it just makes for this awesome, kind of storyline. And in fact, here's where things get a little interesting. Is that, and I'm not going to go too deep into this, okay, because I want to move on to the rest of the list. But Daxam is actually part of the canon Star Trek universe. Ooh, what can we do there? So anyway, but yeah, so I brought that up because now the Green Lantern Ion, who is the embodiment of willpower, is actually a Daxamite named Sodom Yat, which is another character that just has a ton of very interesting history. So yeah, I love the whole Green Lantern core. I love the whole Green Lantern storyline. I love the fact that DC has such a strong science fiction component that people can really get into and can cross over into other universes, unlike anything really that Marvel has. So very, very cool stuff. But since we're on that kick of science fiction, this is the thing that I loved about Marvel. Eventually, I found this character. And probably now is probably my favorite Marvel character ever since Iron Man kind of had a falling from, turned into a kiddie comic. And that is Silver Surfer. Silver Surfer, that there is, if Marvel had a science fiction component, it would be the Silver Surfer, but it doesn't really work out that way so much. And there's times where a Silver Surfer is a little too comedic for my taste. So Silver Surfer, like the thing that I like about him is that, of course, Norrin Radd, that's his real name, is that this is a character that exists. Like he'll help out with the Avengers, he'll help out with the Fantastic Four, he'll do all this different stuff, and his story is very tragic and very interesting. It's a love story, and then he gets powers from Galactus, and of course Galactus is a very cool character because Galactus is this last being from the previous universe that existed before the Big Bang, right? So, Silver Surfer has the power cosmic. Silver Surfer really, he is a commentary on so much of actual human existence and so much of what happens within also, in fictionally, in what happens in the Marvel universe. Because and this is what I like about him, is he's always really above. Like, he is so above everything that's going on. And I can really relate to that. I've always been able to relate to that. Especially as an anarchist, I really relate to that, to where, this is, it's almost like Max Stirner, where it's like, okay, that's your culture, but I didn't decide to be a part of that culture. This is your world, not my world. This isn't what I'm a part of. I'm outside of this shit. And that Silver Surfer is really the embodiment of that. Of being completely outside all of this petty shit. And Silver Surfer really gave me, reading him even as a younger person, really gave me this perspective of thinking about things, and this has stuck with me for a while. There's points where I've forgotten it, but it's really been with me for most of my life. Where you think about things at a galactic scale and not on a planetary or state scale or anything like that. You think, okay, what does this mean to the grander universe? And you know what? When you do that, suddenly a lot of the differences, a lot of all the shit that goes on, you realize, doesn't mean shit. Doesn't affect anything in the larger scale of things, larger scheme of things. So that's what I love about the Silver Surfer. Such a great character. And Silver Surfer was, especially in the early days, and when Straczynski did some recent story arcs with him, he kind of brought this back. Silver Surfer has some of the best quotes. Like, talk about moral messages, he has tons. And again, because he exists kind of outside, he's not a human, and he's not really a superhero necessarily, because he exists outside of all of this crap, that goes on Earth and whatever else. He's able to, give a fresh eye on it. And it's really something. I mean, just some of the best quotes in comic book history, some of the best statements ever made in comic book history are attributed to the Silver Surfer. So that's why I really love that character. Okay, let's move on from that. So we've had Heroes Are Born. We did Batman. We did Green Lantern, Iron Man. So is that 4? Then we did Silver Surfer. So are we on 5? Yeah, I think. All right, we knocked out 5. Let's go on to, and I actually mentioned Valor. Valor was on my top 8. So I guess technically we've kind of done 6. So next I'll move on to, I was thinking about putting Hulk in here. Hulk would have been such an easy pick, but there's really only a very small time frame where I liked Hulk. And that was when Hulk was like the head of a mercenary group, and this was in the 90s. And Hulk wasn't big and dumb. He was big and Bruce Banner. Like, he had the brain of Bruce Banner, but he was still the Hulk. And he ended up getting married to the woman Mary, to Mary Banner. Woo! Because, like I said, even when these guys are writing for kids, sometimes they're sneaking in some very interesting shit, right? Because, so Bruce Banner got married when he was the Hulk to a human woman, a very small human woman. And I mean, what? Do you think they just lived together? I always think about that. I'm like, guys, what are you doing here? You're killing me, and you're probably killing Mary. This is really bad. So that's the thing. Oh, I did like Planet Hulk, like World War Hulk, or Planet Hulk, and Hulk's son Scar. Like those were cool storylines. But those are the only times I really like Hulk, are when you see him with his, like, when he has some degree of mentality in what he's doing, when he has some degree of intelligence in what he's doing, like more so than Hulk Smash, right? So yeah, Hulk would have made that list, but then I just realized, I was like, yeah, but there's so few that I really like a Hulk, so not making the list. But speaking of, here's one that maybe in 50 years might become, that might actually supplant Batman as far as being the most important character ever. If somebody could finally write her right. If somebody could finally do it right. And that is Wonder Woman. Wonder Woman is, now, I mean, I love this comic book character for a bunch of reasons. In the comic books, she's great. Certainly, she's probably been, I mean, it's sort of strange how little success, other than the 77 Wonder Woman series, which I love, with Linda Carter, just whoo. But in DC, you have what's called the Trinity, and that's actually been the name of various storylines and even series, where it's Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman. That's the Trinity, the holy Trinity of DC. And Wonder Woman certainly earns her place. I mean, she has, and I got to give credit in the movie Batman versus Superman, in the Ultimate Edition. In that, when they did such a great job of when Wonder Woman appears, that suddenly shit's about to get real and shit's going to get taken care of. That's exactly how it happens in the comic books at all times with the Justice League or whatever. When Wonder Woman shows up, game on. Like somebody's getting hurt. So, something's getting solved. I mean, like shit's going to go down. And I mean, and that's the thing with her, is that anytime she shows up, it's like when the Sheik, appears in the Zelda games. It's like, okay, everything's going to be fine. And Wonder Woman just has that presence. And obviously not a terrible character to look at by any stretch of the imagination. It's just such a powerful character. It was such a great origin story. So many great things going for her. And unfortunately, nobody really seems to be able to keep her kind of going. I loved what J. Michael Straczynski did with her. I thought that worked out really well. But nobody's really able to kind of keep the keep everything going. Like the best thing they do is usually they'll have her get into some kind of battle with Ares, with the god of war Ares. But then after that, they seem to kind of fall by the wayside every time they write about her. I liked it when she was, Agent Prince. That was very well done. She's just like Batman, where you could put her in any time frame, in any Elseworld story or anything like that, and she just works, and you just get it instantly. And she's also a character where, as far as like whoever's love interest she kind of falls under, it seems to work very well, and you just get so excited. You get 2x more excited about whoever the character is. Like if it was during New 52, where it was Wonder Woman and Superman. That was the best, actually, honestly. That was the best, and it was the last one that I was reading. It was the best comic series that New 52 had going was Wonder Woman and Superman. That was fantastic. She legitimized Superman. Not that, I love the character of Superman as well, but just, she made it happen. She made it work. When it's Wonder Woman and Batman, you get some of the funniest lines in comic book history. It just works. Like every time she's a part of something, she just completely enhances it, no matter what it is. It's fantastic. So I got to give credit to her. And like I said, there's a great possibility that in the next 50 years that she will actually be remembered as the greatest comic book character of all time. I could really see that happening. There's a lot more to go with as far as her. I'd love to see, and I'm sure there's been at least a couple. I would love to see a novelization of some kind of her character. Where it's a story arc of hers, and she's doing her thing, and it's in a novel. Like, because I'd love to get her thought process, kind of like you got with Batman in the Nightfall novel. Because really, that's one of the things that really like solidified Batman with me. Batman was a big deal to me no matter what. But what solidified Batman for me was reading that Nightfall novel, when I was younger. And I think I'd love to see a Wonder Woman novel like that, where you really get, and it's just her, and you get that, kind of that inside story in her head. That would be fantastic. So Wonder Woman, I'd be remiss if I didn't put her super high on the list. She is just amazing, and really I think it goes without saying, every female character in Marvel, frankly, is, she's the measuring stick. Every female character is held up to her level of greatness. And most people don't live up. As hard as they try. And I'm not saying that Marvel doesn't have great female characters. They most certainly do. But it's nothing compared to what you get with, with Wonder Woman. In fact, I think Marvel, honestly, Marvel's sweating right now because I think they know they have that problem. And, that's part of the reason they have this big push for a Miss Marvel movie, because they want Miss Marvel to, Miss Marvel. Miss Marvel, Captain Marvel. Anyway, they need her to compete. Wait, she is Captain Marvel. Yeah. They need Captain Marvel to compete with Wonder Woman. Because they know they really don't have that many great female characters. And it's just a total credit to a lot of the writers, a lot of the people who did a lot of subversive writing to create a strong female character. Yeah, there's a lot of jokes about, if you tie her hands, Wonder Woman's some kind of bondage fetish or something, blah, 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 blah. I know. But believe me, it evolved from that, if that was ever even really a thing. If anybody ever really thought about that or got that. So, yeah, she's the best. She's the queen of comics. I'm not, I guess, yeah, Batman's the best, I know, but I'm just saying that she really, she is the shining example of everything comic books can be. When she's written right. And sadly, and that's the only problem is that many times, especially in the past, I want to say maybe, 2 years or so, she really hasn't been written well. There was a time in the 90s, a short time in the 90s where she wasn't written very well. But someone comes up and picks up the torch and, usually delivers and does a great job. And she's a great villain when she's a villain. When she's the queen of Themyscira and is taking on, man's world and all that. She's a genuine badass when she does that. And you have a real terror as much as you can when you're reading comic books that, hey, the good guys might not win this day because she's doing the business. So anyway, Wonder Woman very high on the list. And I guess I'll end it off. I could have ended it off with Wonder Woman, but let's do number 8 here. And that is wow, boy, this was tough. I wanted to do the Amalgam series because I really liked that, but that was kind of short. The Amalgam series is where you literally, it wasn't a crossover between Marvel and DC, which those have happened, Superman versus Hulk and all that, right? It was an actual amalgamation, thus the title Amalgam, where Marvel and DC characters were mixed together into one. Like you had Wolverine and Batman mixed together. It was called Darkclaw. Or you had JLX, whereas the Justice League X-Men effectively is called JLX. You had Super Soldier, which was a mixture of Superman and Captain America. And you had a bunch of others. It was really cool. So honorable mention, I guess, to the Amalgam universe. That was a lot of fun, and I'd love for them to revisit it. They've put in like little Easter eggs in some comics about those characters, but I really enjoyed that. So anyway, so number 8 has to go to, this was, just the. I want to say this was probably the biggest comic book event ever. And never did any other comic book event, not one that eventually became a movie or some shit like Civil War or something, but one that like everybody knew was happening. It was such a huge deal. Everybody was jumping on it. It probably has the most reprints of any storyline. This is just a massive, massive event. I remember when it happened, I was like 11 and I was crying. I remember pushing my bike up the street and just crying when I read it in the newspaper. It was just unbelievable because my grandmother used to clip out stuff out of the newspaper whenever she knew it was something that I liked, which is really, really sweet of her. Especially those Jenny McCarthy photos. Woo! That obviously wasn't when I was 11. But when I was 11 and I read about this, like I was in tears. I was like, what do you mean he's going to die? And it's the death of Superman. Huge story. Huge. 1992. This was gigantic, and it had so many, like, there were whole story arcs that came after the story arc. They came out of it. Like, to read the whole thing, you have, I don't know, there's got to be at least 100 issues that you'd have to read to get the complete story, and especially when you get to the point, too, where Superman comes back after the Reign of the Superman story arc. But, you end up, Superman dies, you have the character of Doomsday that kills him. Which, whatever, it worked. Like how they did it, it ended up working. Even though Doomsday was never really a threat much outside of that. But it really, it delivered. It happened. Man, like the scene where, where Lois is holding Superman and like the flag is kind of flapping, or not the flag, his cape is ripped and torn, and flapping on a stick behind them. Jesus Christ. Like that was just, that was epic shit. And it was an epic battle too. Like you felt it. They did such a good job with the artistry on that and the marketing, obviously, but they did such a great job in the artistry with that. Like every panel, you felt the punches. Boom, boom. They did it. They made the death of a comic book character really matter because it's a huge problem in comic books that characters always do come back. And yeah, we always kind of knew Superman was going to come back. But this was so good. It was so good. And then what happened afterwards was not equally epic, but very epic in and of itself. When you had the 4 Supermen, you had the Reign of the Supermen, where you had Hank Henshaw, who you found out, you didn't know it was Hank Henshaw, but you had the Cyborg Superman, which everybody thought was the real Superman, just got mixed in as a cyborg. You find out it wasn't that at all. It was a villainous character. But then you had Steel, of course, the Black Superman, who, ended up making this impressive suit. I forget the character's name, Iron something. But anyway, you had Steel. You had the clone that escaped that was based off of Lex Luthor being infused with Kryptonian DNA. That ended up becoming Superboy. That was really cool. And then you had, of course, the Eradicator, who at first was claiming that he was Superman, but he was a little too much of a bad guy, and the Eradicator was, a villain of Superman's past, also of Kryptonian technology, but whatever. Anyway, it just worked, and when the final series ended, when that Reign of the Supermen series ended and Superman finally came back, Superman came back with a vengeance, man. He had the long hair, was listening to rock, to heavy metal and everything. Like he was just really a revitalized character. So the death of Superman, just a great storyline to read. Everything after it, Funeral for a Friend was another part of that, and then Reign of the Superman. Like, all of that is worthy reading. And now I know a lot of people don't like this. Personally, I loved it when it happened, and I was really excited for it. So for a little while, I was a pretty big Superman fan after Death of Superman, because Superman was, living up to being super. But in would have been 98, they ended up doing where because there was a bunch of different reasons for this, but a lot of it had to do with sort of recharging too much after being killed by Doomsday, or after coming back from being killed by Doomsday. Superman gets these new powers where he becomes what's sometimes called Electric Superman or Superman Blue. And he becomes like this new character. And it was really great because in 98, they did this thing where the issue that they released, because he was kind of like electric blue, that was sort of the color that he ended up becoming. And they had like this glow in the dark cover and everything, because the suit was like part blackish blue and white. And they had a new S symbol that was really awesome. I thought it was really great. And he had all these new powers new challenges that he had to go through, because he had to have a containment suit to be Clark Kent, just to stay human, because he was effectively, kind of going into another dimension from being pure energy and all this. And I thought, I know a lot of people kind of didn't buy it and didn't think that it worked out. I thought it was really cool. And I thought it offered a lot of new, like I said, a lot of new challenges, and there was a lot of new solutions for what Superman can do, but he still had that Superman morality. What I think caused the problem is that with the different writers and the different storylines, they weren't consistent with Superman's powers, which has been a problem with Superman across the board up until really recently. To where there were points where his ability to do something just didn't make sense. It was situations. For an analogy, it's like in that episode of The Next Generation where Ensign Rowe and Geordi are phase cloaked. How come they're not falling through the floor? It was things like that were just so ridiculous. Why didn't this happen within the comic book? Even though comic books don't have to really follow science, it still didn't make a whole lot of sense. But I still enjoyed it. I thought it was a really cool take for the character. And then eventually they split. There ended up becoming two Supermen. There was Superman Red and Superman Blue, both electric. And that's when I really started liking it, because Superman Red was this real, kind of hothead, badass, really into getting it on with the ladies and all that. It was a really cool character. I enjoyed that. And then, obviously, a few years later, they brought everything back together, and you ended up with one Superman, and he wasn't Electric Superman anymore. And then I kind of lost interest in Superman. But it was cool for the time. Superman Blue and Superman Red, I thought it was pretty awesome. And it reminded me of, I think what it kind of appealed to me was that when I was a kid, when I was a very young kid, and I was playing in an arcade, there was a Superman arcade game back in the day, back in the 80s. And in that, it was two-player. And one of them was like a red Superman. I was like, oh, who's this red Superman? This is so cool. I didn't know there was a red Superman. And there was like a red Superman that appeared in the 60s. I know that. But anyway, I thought that was really awesome. And so when the Electric Superman went to red and blue, then I was like, oh, this reminds me of that red Superman, even though that arcade game had nothing to do with the comics other than it was Superman and, yeah. So... So I really enjoyed that. And all of that, really, I think that should kind of be counted as one giant story arc, which is Death of Superman all the way to kind of the reconstitution of Superman Red and Superman Blue. And it's a great story arc. It's a great few years. You're talking almost 6 years worth, over that, almost 7 years worth of comic books. And it is, Superman was at its peak. But for whatever reason, it just, I guess it all didn't jumpstart the sales. Death of Superman did. But once Superman kind of got his powers back and the Electric Superman storyline and all that, it didn't get the reaction that I think DC was hoping for. It didn't get their expectations weren't met. And so they just kind of went back to, kind of doing a number one with the original Superman. And I get it. I understand why they did that. But I don't know. The people didn't care about Superman anyway, so you might as well do the weird shit with it and let the people that were digging that keep buying the comics. Whatever. So anyway, there we go. There's our top 8. We did Heroes Reborn, Batman, Green Lantern universe, core and all that. Iron Man, Silver Surfer, Wonder Woman. We did mention Valor or Largand, the Daxamites, kind of part and parcel there. Of course, the death of Superman. That's my top 8 for Marvel and DC. I think that really stands up. So anyway, I've been going an hour and a half, which seems to be how all these things always end up. So I don't want to spend really much more time on it. Like I said, if I was to choose between what's better, Marvel or DC, I think DC stands up, largely because of what we talked about, in that it has that strong science fiction component, and also that these characters, the DC characters, always seem to be a lot larger than life, or they are the opposite, where they're far more relatable to the everyday person. That's my opinion. You can disagree. In fact, you can message me about it. Maybe I'll talk about it in a future entry in the comic book Top 8 series. Again, we will talk about other comic book series coming down the line. Maybe we'll get into a little bit of history of comic books in general, or talk about how, there's that great book out there, which is, Our Gods Wear Spandex. I think that's the name of it, where it's all about how the reason comic books are so popular is because really it's our Greek gods effectively, come back to life in the printed form, and that's why everybody appeals to it, because it gets to certain primal aspects of, of humanity or whatever. It's a very interesting subject. I'm not saying I agree with it, but it is a very interesting subject. So anyway, there you go. Maybe we need to do like a top villains. That'd be interesting. Like I said, I could talk about comic books forever. So hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for being a patron. Thank you so much for your patronage, for, the value you bring to me, and in all kinds of ways, not just in dollar amount, but it really helps out around here. So thank you so much. And I'll see you on the other side. Got another Q&A coming out this week, and maybe some other surprises. Woo!
You just experienced Sovryn Tech. Go to sovryntech.com, that's SOVRYN tech.com, and connect with us there. Find links from today's show and catch our podcast feed. Sovryn Tech is copy heart. Copying art is an act of love, and love is not subject to law. So please share the show however you like. Welcome to the evolution.